Good evening and thanks for signing on. I'm going to give everyone another minute or two to join the webinar and then we'll get started. Looks like people are still signing on, so I'm just going to give it another minute or two to let folks join and then we'll get started. All right, good evening and thank you for joining the United Solar Energy supporters for this Follow the Money webinar. In this session, we will hear from two researchers, Dr. Richard Perez and Dr. Jennifer Ifft, about the economics of solar energy. My name is Hillary Adoon. I'm an attorney at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia Law School, and I run a legal practice called the Renewable Energy Legal Defense Initiative, which provides free representation to people who support renewable energy projects in their communities, and I'm on the board of the United Solar Energy Supporters. I'll be moderating this panel, and people who are tuning in should feel free to send questions to the Q&A throughout the panel, and we'll ask audience questions at the very end. Dr. Richard Perez leads solar energy research at the University at Albany's Atmospheric Sciences Research Center. He has served multiple terms on the board of the American Solar Energy Society and as associate editor of Solar Energy Journal. He has produced over 250 journal articles, conference papers, books, and chapters. He holds patents on energy storage and load management using PV. He has received several international awards, including a certificate for outstanding research from the U.S. Department of Energy, American Solar's Charles Greeley Abbott Award, and the first International Building and Daylight Award from the Velux Foundation, as well as the International Solar Society's Farrington Daniels Award for outstanding contributions in science, technology, and engineering of solar energy applications, which lead to enhancing our world and the conditions of humankind. Dr. Jennifer Ifft is an associate professor and extension specialist in agricultural policy at Kansas State University. She has an integrated research and extension program that covers policy and regulatory issues that affect U.S. agriculture, including the relationship between farm viability and energy development. Her current projects are in the areas of non-traditional finance, crop insurance, farmland markets, and farm labor. She has published on how farm programs and regulations are capitalized into farmland values, farmland value determinants and measurement, farm labor and management, and crop insurance and farm debt. She also regularly publishes in the farm press and works with farm sector policymakers and stakeholders. Before coming to Kansas State University, she was an assistant professor at the Cornell University Charles H. Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management and worked in the farm economy branch of the USDA Economic Research Service. She has a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, an MPhil from the University of Cambridge, and a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She grew up on her family's farm in central Illinois. So with that, I will kick it over to Dr. Perez to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share that screen. Can you see everything? All right. Today it's about follow the money. And of course, we are talking about solar energy. So solar energy is a big resource. It is a 24/365 resource, not only when the sun shines, but it can be made to work all the time, around the clock, around the year, and it's inexpensive. So if you have attended some of the other webinars I presented for US before, I talked about how big the resource was. It dwarfs any other ones, either finite or renewables, by orders of magnitude. It's a giant resource. And there are ways to make it affordably 24/365 by applying some still a little bit out of the box and controversial issue in some, but it is the least cost resource to do overbuild, curtail, that we call implicit storage. So I refer to my past webinars on this one, and I'll be happy to answer technical questions on this today, but today the focus is on the money. So let's go right to the bank. The Lazard Bank every year publishes a levelized cost of energy analysis for all the resources. It's also the Department of Energy, other sources publish that, very comparable, Bloomberg. But I like the Lazard because they compare all the technologies in one graph. On the x-axis, you have the unsubsidized cost of electricity. It's in dollar per megawatt hour. If you want a unit you're more familiar with, cents per kilowatt hour, you divide those numbers by 10. And let's focus on utility scale solar, which is the one that will take place in on farmlands. And you can see that according to all reliable resources, if you compare the unsubsidized, so there is no tax credit, no subsidies, nothing, it's just straight business cost. On a straight business cost today, it is already considerably cheaper than the new conventional resources. Here we are talking about comparing to new power plants, so building. If you compare it to fully depreciated plants, so operational costs only, it's about on par with it. And we are not stopping there. The utility scale energy has been dropping down dramatically since 2009, about 19% per year, 11% per year since 2015. And Bloomberg and others, the International Energy Agency, forecast that it will also decrease by another 5% per year until 2030. So that's where we'll be in 8-9 years from now. So much lower than anything else. Of course, that comparison is not quite fair because solar PV and wind are intermittent resources. And if you compare it to dispatchable resources like gas, nuclear, and coal, it's not fair. But if you apply those techniques of optimal wind and solar blending, and you apply implicit storage with overbuilding and curtailment, this is where it would take you for firm 24/365 power. So still quite a bit cheaper than conventionals, and maybe a little more expensive than the fully dispatched resource, fully paid for resources. And that little 86 here, that little losange is for wind. It's of offshore wind. So also to put things in perspective, offshore wind is big and coming in New York, but it, as you can see, it's quite expensive if you really follow the money. And on top of that, we are looking at unsubsidized cost here. The Lazard Bank looked at straight business, how much you pay for the technology to operate it, to produce the energy. But the conventional ones do have hidden subsidies when you build a conventional plant and operate it, even though it's a straight business cost, it includes things that enable you to proceed without paying what you ought to pay. For nuclear, it's a Price-Anderson Act, which insures all the power plants. Without that act, that dates back from 1955, there would be no nuclear power plants in this country because no insurance company would insure those power plants. And also, the fossil fuel-based plants currently pay very little in terms of environment and climate liability. They just operate standard. So if I look at the real cost, it's probably quite a bit to the right on that. So a good case can be made that if you look at cost of electricity 10 years from now, solar is the clear winner compared to conventional resources. Let's move a little bit to upstate New York and to where the rubber meets the road, or more where the PV meets the farm. So an acre of PV, depending on the density of the power plant, producing electricity at 5 cents per kilowatt hour will generate about $15,000 to $40,000 per acre worth of electricity. And will also provide in the neighborhood of $1,000 per acre if a farmer leases his land for the plant. And that to be compared to a few $100 per benefit for a typical farm profit. Let's look at another crop of energy that's not abundant in New York, but still quite a big amount of corn ethanol, mostly out west. But corn ethanol will produce 450 gallons per acre. In fact, it will produce only 180 per acre net because it takes so much energy to produce that corn in the first place that the net value is much lesser. And the revenues from that corn would be about $440 per acre. So if you compare those two, it's not even close. It's a 100-to-1 ratio. For me, it's like the go PV big way. It's much more value for the state, and it also quite a bit more value for the farmer, as we'll hear more from Jennifer's talk. So if you look at it from a farm income point of view, PV is also the clear winner. And it doesn't take all that much farm to do a big job. In fact, we just published a paper in solar energy that's coming out. In fact, today it was accepted yesterday, and I reviewed the proof yesterday, so it will be online and in the coming days. With 1% of the farmland in the States, you can produce 20 to 50 gigawatts of PV, which is about between 4 and 10 times more than what New York State plans for the year 2030 in terms of PV. So this is the paper. It's going to come out in we publish that for every single state in the US, and it comes up with an interesting web application where if you go there, you can actually adjust all those percentage number, see how much of urban space you want to use, suburban roofs, and farmland, and even old farmlands, which has been converted to forest, and play games and see how much is for the taking in terms of electricity production in New York. And you'll find out that there is tons and tons of room to grow. So whether you look at it from a cost of electricity standpoint or from a rural farm income standpoint, there is a giant case to be made for PV. And if you follow the money, that's exactly why it will take you to solar. Smart money will take you to solar. That's going to be the cheapest, biggest resource out there. And on this, I'll close that presentation, and I'm looking forward for the debate and questions.
Jenny, would you like to go next? Dr. Ifft?
Jenny's good. Okay, let me get my slides. Okay. All right, just 1 minute so I can do the screen share. Okay. Okay, do you see my slide? Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, okay. Okay, great. All right, it's great to be here. I can say back in New York, right? Most participants are from New York. I moved to Kansas last July. So I'm going to talk about a particular research project I did on energy income and farm viability. But before I do that, I want to give a lot of context. So one thing that economists arguably are good at is asking a narrow question that has a sort of a robust, specific answer. But that doesn't mean we ignore the broader, messier context. I think that's important here. Next, I'll talk more generally about how energy income could affect the agricultural sector, and then give different evidence from my own work as well as other work on that. And I'll discuss a lot of unanswered questions we have as well. First of all, just sort of a baseline on some sort of basic facts or evidence that I sort of informs my work. So Dr. Perez just talked about you only need 1% of farmland in New York State. And there's ample evidence that energy production doesn't threaten food security. There could be local economic impacts. There's definitely local conflict, but it's not a food security issue. And I always say that when I talk about energy and agriculture. Second, there's a lot of evidence that energy development creates jobs and increases incomes locally on average. And that's just sort of additional income helps communities on average. There are other considerations, social, health, environmental, speaking about energy development, not just with solar. And it's also important how revenues are managed, where they're invested, how reliable these revenues are. But generally, extra income can help rural communities. There's a lot of good economic studies that have been done that have showed that, or the US economy for that matter. So why do we care about, I'm an agricultural policy specialist. So why am I looking at energy development? If we look historically, oil and gas is on private land. A lot of farmland was converted for oil and gas production. The figure I have on the slide is 7 million acres, which seems big. Annually, though, we have 90 million acres of corn grown in the US. So maybe it's relatively not so big, but 7 million feels big. About a third of all farmland is in a county that has potential for shale gas production. And then with renewables like solar, there is a potential for more land use. So energy is going to be increasingly located on farmland. Now there's two sort of ways you could look at this from an economist, and one is more of I guess I call it a farm management perspective. There's been a lot of great work that's been done on dual use. So solar grazing is one area, which in New York was really exciting. So you can, how do you graze sheep? When you have solar? Another picture I have is from a study in Arizona that looked at how you could have vegetable production on and solar dual use. So that's one important area of research that kind of shows what the possibilities are. That's not what I do, but I did want to mention it because that's what a lot of people think of. I'm looking at it more from sort of a broad policy perspective. So whether that's local, state, or even national. And a part of this is that either locally or nationally, there's a lot of support for agriculture. There's preferential taxation for agriculture. So if I own farmland, I'm going to be taxed at its value in farming, not in alternative uses, which might be higher. There's a lot of money in easements for farmland, a lot of land trusts. In New York State, especially, there's a lot of concern with protecting prime farmland. So as a society and communities, we care about agriculture. And at the same time, there's a lot of, I said varying preferences here for energy development, because there's a lot of variation in how energy is sited across states. But in a lot of places they do, energy development is encouraged, especially renewable energy, or there's subsidies or other favorable policies for energy development. And so when I was working at Cornell in New York State, one of the big questions is a lot of the potential utility scale solar sites were happening on farmland. So there's a question, should energy development on farmland be restricted? Should it be allowed on prime farmland? Is that something we should maybe not restrict, but try to have some incentive or some penalty? And this is one part of a lot of different considerations. If I talked to the Farm Bureau, they said this is about property rights. And that was basically it, but also, local government siting processes. But the question that I had as an agricultural economist was, is energy development an important source of income for the local farm economy? And that's where this sort of more narrow question that is a part of this bigger debate and sort of energy transition that's going on. That's where I got started. And I guess the first, when you think about how energy income is going to affect a farm, it's sort of important to say, what do you mean by a farm? Because agriculture in the US, it's really diverse. There's a lot of local specialization, a lot of different farm types. And so it's sort of important to understand those distinctions. And the first is that the vast majority of farms in the US are family owned and operated. And what's considered by a farm by the USDA, nearly 90% of all farms are small family farms. But a lot of the production, and these small family farms have about half of all farmland in the US, but they contribute a relatively small share of production. Most production is happening on large and mid-sized farms. And the objectives of these farms and how they earn income, how they support their families, it's really different. And I think there's a lot of ways you can show this, but I like this chart from USDA. If you can see median farm income. So that's sort of the midpoint in terms of income. The median US farm income is negative. And so that means at least you have 1 million farms that don't make money farming on average. But the median off-farm income in recent years is over $70,000. So that off-farm income is really important to majority of US farms. That, it's sort of half of all farmland in the US. So when I think about energy income and farm viability, sort of the local characteristics of local agriculture are going to matter a lot. Because these farms have different objectives. So all of these farm types can and do earn a profit in some cases, but on average, you need to achieve some level of scale for economic sustainability. So can you support the farm, maintain the farm from its own income? Now, this isn't a value statement about large versus small farms. That's an interesting debate, and it's happening, the food justice movement, other places, but this is more just a statement of how the farm economy works right now versus any type of value statement. So to go back to the point, most farms are family farms. So any income, it could either be spent for the family, economists call that consumption. So this is sort of the general idea that extra income can help rural communities, or it could be used by the farm business. So it's not necessarily going to even go into agriculture. It might help be used for families. So for families that don't make money from agriculture, but are using their off-farm income to support their family living expenses, that money is necessary. So when you think about energy income for smaller farms, it's a way that it's not necessarily going to be used for agriculture, but it's one way that could be maintained. And the other case is if you have a farm that is sort of more commercially viable? Is that energy income going to be used on the farm? And there's a couple conditions that you really need to have that take place. And the first one is that they're not all, they could make investments, they could become more profitable, but they don't, for whatever reason, their lenders aren't giving them the money, they don't have access to capital. So this is an otherwise profitable farm, but they can't make the amount of investments that they would like. And this does exist to some degree. There's studies that show this. And in these cases, energy income could increase credit access. This could be through increasing land values. Land serves as collateral for most farm loans. It could also be lenders could see it as this is going to increase the likelihood that farm loans get repaid. So it sort of improves their credit score through a couple different channels. You could also, energy income could also be used to directly support new investments. In both cases, you have to have a sufficient level of income to see that happen. So it's interesting in the previous presentation, income from solar is much higher than other energy streams. So you could see more potential there. So the way that I approach this study is I took the sort of question is I took USDA farm survey data from 2014 when there was almost 30,000 farms that were sampled, and it had detailed information. What kind of energy income did they have? Was it oil and gas? Did they have access to credit? Did they have trouble getting enough credit? What kind of investments were they making? And all kinds of details about their farm operation. And I use a method called propensity score matching, which if you look at the paper, there's more detail than most people would want to know. But the basic idea is we looked at farms that were similar in almost every dimension, but whether or not they had energy income. And our key finding was pretty interesting. We found that energy income had no relationship, positive, negative, with credit access. So they weren't having better or worse access to credit, and they weren't having different levels of investment. This is a little bit surprising at first, but I think I'm going to explain it a little bit more. When you think about it more, it's not terribly surprising, especially because we're looking at the nation as a whole. Go through this. There are, I think, one thing we always say when we talk about this finding, that this is sort of we always look at average effects. So there are some farms where this energy income has been important for them to expand or to sort of maintain their operations. And that's not a contradiction. It's always going to be true. There's different individual experiences. There's one study that found that farms in Oklahoma were able to make additional farmland purchases with energy from fracking. Some evidence of farm consolidation in the Marcellus region, which is a less shale gas production. And there's pretty good evidence that energy production or the potential for energy production can increase farmland values, but there hasn't been a lot of research in this area. And there's a lot of questions that are not totally, renewables are still relatively new. So there hasn't been a lot of research on renewables. And just because the income is potentially higher, it's more stable, it could have a different impact. There's also the issues of land constraints, which were talked about a lot in New York, where you have a lot of livestock operations that need access to land for their nutrient management plans. So if you had a really livestock intensive area, there could be a lot of conflict if cropland goes out of production. And the other thing is, if you just had so much land go out of production on a large scale locally, it could have broader impacts on the local economy. You just wouldn't have people spending as much money locally or producing. Again, on average at the state level, 1% of farmland. It's more of a local issue. So, we looked at 1 year of data, I think looking at sort of the long-term farm panel data, which is pretty difficult to access, is probably an important area. land values. I think that these broader studies on rural economic impact are important. And as I wrap up, I'd like to share two stories. This is from two stories from my last extension presentation in New York State. And two farmers got up and they talked about their experience of sort of solar energy, the income they were getting for that. And one was an older gentleman from down in the Hudson Valley, and he had grown up on his family's farm there. It had been commercially viable at one point, but it mostly stopped. It was pretty poor soil. And sort of the farm economy had declined in the area. I think they had some hay or something, but it just wasn't very active in agriculture anymore. But it was land that had been in his family and been farmed historically. And he talked about how, well, because I was able to put on solar, I was able to keep the land through my retirement and keep it in the family. We were able to stay on the land, still be involved in the community. And so that's, one case where it was, it's more the case of somebody who wasn't dependent on agriculture, but the income was important to him and his family. The other person that got and stood up was a sort of a larger, someone who operated a larger farm in Western New York, very entrepreneurial, had a seed business. And he talked about how, well, we looked at the investment. We could either plant vegetables or we could have solar panels, and solar panels, $1,000 an acre. That was a clear winner. So it's the investment decision that we made. And so that was sort of extra income for their local economy and for this business. But I can guarantee you that farmer had good access to credit, and any feasible investment they wanted to make shouldn't have been a problem with or without the solar income. So was it necessarily growing the farm economy? No, but it was extra income for the local economy. So just to conclude, new energy income, new solar income, definitely can help rural households, whether or not they have a farm, and communities. There's a lot of evidence for that, a lot of stories about how that's happened. The impact of energy production of agriculture, I think of it as very location specific. If you have a lot of farms that rely on off-farm income, this energy income could be an important part of helping them keep having a farm and have some type of agricultural production. If you look at more commercially viable farms in areas where there is a sort of a viable commercial farming sector, there's a more narrow set of conditions for energy income to really help the local farm economy as opposed to the local rural economy. You have to have the energy income has to be large enough. You have to have poor access to credit. And so that might not happen everywhere. So generally when I think of, the benefits may not be for a particular industry like agriculture. They may be more general for the local economy. So that's how I think about energy income in the farm economy. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you both. That was wonderful. I know I learned a lot, and I have a couple questions, and I'm going to be weaving in questions from the audience as well. To start, I'm wondering if either or both of you could address whether you think there are barriers to reaping the economic benefits that you just described, and if you would have advice to communities who want to be sure to access those benefits. Dr. Perez, you're on mute.
Thank you. I say the biggest barrier, as I see, is that people may not have all the numbers in mind. It's very important to keep those numbers that I showed, the 100-to-1 between solar and corn ethanol. I was not fully aware of it, but now that I look at it, there are not many that are fully aware of that. But when you look at those numbers, that should just break any barrier. Solar is really good. You don't need a lot of acres to get communities a lot of income. You don't need to pave the state over.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add other than just good management, right? Good standard governance. You know, how you manage that money, how you invest it, doing that right, whatever the objectives are.
Great, thank you. This is a question really for Dr. Perez. You used the term implicit storage, and I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on what that means.
All right, so I invite you to take a look at the other webinar that I gave to USES about 3 months ago. But what I will say is that it's a very counterintuitive solution. You need power 24/7. There is no doubt about it. If you want to go big time with PV, you cannot live with the intermittent resources we have today, because they will break the grid and nobody will want them. And the cheapest way to transform them from viable to 24/7 year-round is to build more than you need, not all that much more, maybe 30–40% more, and just waste the excess. Just don't even price it. But that's so much outside of the current DNA to develop solar that it's not palatable. So to make it a little more palatable, we coined the term implicit storage to design, overbuild, and throw away some of the output, because it's a catalyst to storage. You can do exactly what storage does, but with much less storage and a much better price at the end of the day. So you can get by with full 24/7, 365 PV power at a very reasonable price. So that's what implicit storage is. It's a new term that designates build more than you need and throw away some of the output, because it's the cheapest way to do it, even though it's so counterintuitive that it's not being done today. But some people are really catching up fast on that.
Great, thank you. This is a question really for one or both of you. Are you aware of any studies that have been done to show the impacts on local public budgets as a result of solar development on farmland?
I'll leave it to Jennifer. I'm not aware.
No, but it sounds like a good thing to study.
Okay, maybe add it to that list on your final slide there. What would you say is a good response to people who argue solar is just not affordable or efficient enough yet? Are there ways that we can address this misunderstanding of our current situation?
I'd say come and take a look at the Follow the Money webinar, because you cannot argue with that. So even when I started doing that talk, I didn't know my job would be so easy, because all the big banks are publishing tons of stuff on the energy resources, and you look at their numbers and they speak for themselves. Solar has evolved a vast amount in 10 years. It used to be expensive, and now it's the cheapest.
Great, thank you. And this is a question which I think is based on the Lazard data that you showed, whether current estimates of levelized costs take into account disposal, and if recycling of materials for renewable energy facilities were required, whether that would affect the overall levelized cost of these types of energy sources.
I don't think it does. I think it's straight business comparison. So in as much as it doesn't take the pollution costs from the conventionals and the disposal costs for nuclear plants, it doesn't either address the disposal costs for PV. So the studies I've read on that may add maybe 5 to 10% of the operational cost of PV if you want to go into a fully disposable, recyclable cycle with all those plants.
Okay, thank you. And this is a question for Dr. Ifft. Can you talk a little bit about the role of land rentals in farm viability and how solar might affect this, and specifically whether farmers who are not landowners are the ones who might have the most to lose, whereas landowners have the most to gain?
Right, right. So a lot of farmland is rented. So yeah, I didn't talk about that, but that is an important aspect of all of this. So who rents the most farmland? I'd say two groups. Generally, it's mostly commercial, the sort of larger farms that have a higher share of rented land. Renting land is also important for new farms, just because it's unless you inherit a bunch of land, it's it's hard to come in and buy a bunch of farmland. It just takes, it's such a huge investment. So if you think about that in terms of solar or energy, it would depend. I talked about land constraints, but it's just how much you have available in a certain area and how it's going to affect that market. You know, if you have, again, if you have like New York, if you have a lot of dairies that really need that cropland, you know, it could be pretty painful. Or if you have a lot of, you know, commercial grain production and you lose 200 acres of rental ground, it's not nice, but that's something that happens. That's your landlord relations are a part of your business model. Like that's, you should be aware of those risks. It's something they're dealing with for other causes as well. So I think it's important. It's going to be very context specific.
Great, thank you. And we have a question about whether either of you are able to comment on a recent study by Corey Lang at the University of Rhode Island about the impacts of solar farms on neighboring property values, if that's something that you're familiar with.
I'm not familiar with that study. I know there is a lot of brouhaha about impact on values. I think a lot is based on fear mongering. So solar farms can look very beautiful, and then, you know, some of them are poorly designed. My gut feeling is that 15 years from now, nobody will think about it, and farm will be just like another crop, solar crop, instead of having cow. Yeah, you'll have cows here, cows among the solar panels. So yeah, it's a lot of fear about nothing, I'd say. But it's real, because everything has value, even things that are not based on fundamental facts.
I'm looking it up now. I know Corey. He does. It's probably residential, which isn't really my area.
Okay.
But I'm curious now.
All right. We have a question about the weather in New York State, and specifically how you deal with the possibility that there may be less solar energy available in the winter in New York when it's cloudy or when solar panels are covered with snow. Is that a concern?
Snow is very much of a concern. The bad weather in winter is not. All the studies we've done are based on 15, 20 years of data, taking into account everyday cloudy periods. They call it solar droughts, with clouds for 20 days in a row. And even that, if you apply the smart solutions, you're going to come at a reasonable price year round without losing power at any time. Snow is a problem. You will have to find some smart management of PV farms to remove the snow one way or the other. There are some smart ideas out there. One of them that I like is the tracking units, that they could go into vertical position when it snows and then go back to their normal duty after snow. That's one solution, but people are creative, and yeah, snow is an issue. But global warming will take care of that, right?
We also have this is another question about a specific study. So let me know if you're not familiar with it, but one audience member is wondering if Dr. Perez can comment on the work of Charles Hall and others who have criticized solar on the basis of energy return on energy invested?
I would have to read that paper, but that's a conversation I had with my boss when I was hired 40 years ago, a long time ago. And he also asked me that very question. And back then, the energy return on investment of a PV panels, I showed him with equations like you do when you're a grad student. It was 8 years back then. Today, it's more like 1.5 years or less. So that's not even a concern anymore. The energy payback is incredibly fast. It will pay back 30 to 50 times what you put in terms of energy. So it's also some red herring out there that has some keep life of their own.
Okay, thank you. And this is related to some of the discussions we were having earlier about the impacts on food production of solar panels. Are there areas that you're aware of where solar panels have replaced grain, and could that affect the cost of feed and in turn affect the dairy industry? Or is that also context specific?
I think that's, well, I mean, to do a study, you'd have to have enough solar in a dairy community to actually measure it. But having I would say that having, like, being able to grow corn silage is really important for dairy farms. So once you lose access to that land, it's much more expensive to feed your cattle without that. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons that, well, there's a lot of reasons why organic milk is more expensive, but that's one of them. So just, it's a big cost.
But let's also get back to the numbers. You were talking 1% of farmland, so that would be the impact on the cost of grain. So you have 99% of the land instead of having 100%, then the impact of your price would be 1%. So nothing.
At a state or national level, I'm not worried. Yeah, I agree.
We also have a question about whether you're familiar with how much farmland is lost to building development as smaller farms go under, especially given that that's land that will never be returned to production, whereas solar farms typically have a life of 30 years and could be returned to farmland afterwards.
That's a great question. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, there are lots of farmland lost to suburban sprawl. In fact, if you look at that little bar chart that I showed for New York, you can see the suburban sprawl surface area in the state is just about the size of the hay and pasture area already.
Do you have anything to add, Dr. Ifft?
No, I mean, I think a lot of that, millions of acres went back into forests.
Yeah, that's something very.
That's a longer story, but.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story to yeah. Yeah, the biggest part of New York State is forests. Half of that was farms 100 years ago. So one of the points I often make is let's use some of that forest, which used to be farm.
Another question is if you can speak to this, whether the information you've been sharing about the economics of solar only apply to utility scale solar, or if that would also apply to rooftop solar or community scale solar as well.
So for me, community scale solar can be utility scale because communities can be big and they can be regrouped on a utility scale size. Rooftop solar is another, it's much more expensive than utility scale solar, of course, but it has all kinds of other values. First, it's part of your real estate. You can make roofs out of that. So it has some building integrated PV value. So there are all other trade-offs to consider with building integrated photovoltaic systems. So they have another type of economics. Plus, you're not taking any land away from any purpose. You just reuse that space for some other things.
I don't have anything to add.
Great, thank you. This is a question specifically for Dr. Perez, whether you have any sense of the extent to which reliance on equity financiers reduces the cost competitiveness of solar, and would a feed-in tariff or another policy reduce the levelized cost of solar?
So the levelized cost of solar is only a function of the capital cost, the capex, and the operational cost, OPEX. Plus, it's a function of how cheap you can borrow money to build your plant. So it's a function of those three things. So in that respect, if you can bring in capital at low interest rates, you're going to have an advantage on someone who has to borrow at higher rates. But I think it's the case for business in America or business all over the world. For everything you do, if you have access to capital at low interest rates, you have an advantage on the others.
Okay, thank you. We're coming up on the hour. We have time for one or two more questions, if there are any. And in the meantime, do either of you have anything else that you'd like to address that we haven't gotten to, or any other topics for discussion you'd like to raise?
I think it was pretty enjoyable, and I really enjoyed all the questions. They were really good. I learned a lot from Jennifer, but I don't know that part of the farm world too well, so now I know it a little bit better. So I'm really happy about that. And the final thing I'd like to say is just keep the numbers in mind. The numbers speak for themselves always. Don't listen to conspiracy theories out there. Look at the numbers.
Yeah, I learned a lot too. Are you going to share your slides, or do you have them on your website?
Yeah, I'll send you a copy.
I don't think that the lower. I don't think I've seen the cost chart. That's pretty.
Yeah, I'll send you a copy of the slides, and I'm sure the video will be also on the USAS website, but I'll send you a copy as well, for sure.
I just heard Kansas is going to increase solar, so it might start getting more interesting out here too.
Yeah, and if you go to that web app that we did for that paper we published, it's every single state. So Kansas is in there as well. So you can go out, click on Kansas, and see what happens there.
I'm looking forward to checking out that website. It sounds like an amazing resource, and this webinar is being recorded, and so will be available. We did get a couple more questions, and I'll just take advantage of the few remaining minutes that we have. Here's a somewhat detailed one for Dr. Perez, actually about, I think maybe it's not quite the same slide that you were discussing. The slide with resolving intermittency delivering 24,365. There is a vertical bar labeled 2030. What does this vertical bar mean? Why is it far to the left of the blue horizontal cost bars for each energy type? So if you can visualize that slide, if you're able to address that, otherwise we can connect you by email to address that question.
Yeah, I can visualize it pretty well.
Okay.
I started putting a vertical bar through the cost of utility scale solar, so you could visually compare it to the conventional. And then I say, by 2030, that bar will move way to the left because the cost of PV keeps decreasing. That's where it is today, according to the Lazard Bank, but it's been going down at 19% and 10%, and it's going to go down by 5% a year for the next 10 years. So if you look at 2030, PV is going to be even cheaper than it is today. So that bar will be way, way to the left. Then I moved it back to the right because you have to transform PV and you have to overbuild, you have to add storage and everything else to make it 24/7. So then it moves back to the right.
Okay, thank you. And then this is related, if you can break down the costs for the different optimal solution combinations in 2030 and provide more details about the costs in 2030 as compared to the costs in 2020.
Yeah, we published quite a bit about that, and the optimal solution we see for New York long-term by 2040 is a mix of 55% solar, about 40% wind, not counting offshore yet. We've not done the study with offshore, but just onshore wind, and keeping 5% fully dispatchable resource, which could be legacy natural gas, or could be any new e-fuels based on hydrogen and other things. But it's going to be dominated by solar because solar is so cheap.
Okay, thank you. Final question for Dr. Ifft, and then we'll call it a night. Are you aware of any examples of farmers cooperatives investing in solar, which the questioner says has been done for wind?
I don't do a lot of work with cooperatives, but I mean, I think it's a business decision. I mean, there's all sizes of cooperatives, and they're gonna, yeah, if they have land, they might, if it makes economic sense to just do on-site, for their, put in solar panels like a lot of businesses do on their roofs, then they would do that. But I don't know. I don't have any specific examples that come to mind.
Okay. All right, well, we're coming up on the hour. I think we've covered everything. I know that we've covered a lot of ground, and USIS is really grateful to both of you for joining us and giving your time and sharing your expertise. This was really, really helpful in terms of getting a full picture of the economics. So thank you both. And we will be making this available, I believe, on the USIS website. Eva, anything else to add?
I will say, thank you, Hillary, that we are now trying to measure the efficacy of our webinars. So once you exit this webinar, there will be a survey that will pop up for you, and it'll just take you a couple minutes, and we would really like if you could fill that out for us. Thank you all for coming today.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.